everybody, I'm going to share this from Strategic Culture Foundation, and I'll leave you the link to it underneath this, but I think it's very, very important, and British people need to understand exactly what is going on behind the scenes here. And people like myself who are thoroughly aware, it's one of the reasons why we were so loath to leave the EU, despite the many problems that the EU has within itself of internal corruption. That corruption actually is minimal when we consider the corruption presently governing us through our government and the insidious powers that they're giving themselves. And it's knowing these insidious powers that leaves people like myself very, very concerned now about the fact we've pulled out of the EU and we do not have EU Parliament and EU courts to address actually severe crimes being committed against the British public as part of British government's legislation, powers that they've given themselves that totally deny our human rights. Now, we're dealing with a government that has openly pledged and promised to scrap our human rights, and as you can see from this article, the fact is that the government has already scrapped our human rights, and that is why it is operating the way it has been, and 120,000 people are now dead through austerity. We have yet to have a national day of mourning for these people. Apparently they don't matter. The only people that we should mourn for and express any upset, you know, en masse about are people who've been injured through other forms of terrorist attacks. But let's face reality. British people have been attacked by economic terrorism under the label austerity, and 120,000 people are dead as a direct result, okay? 120,000 people. That's a lot of people. Where's the National Day of Mourning? Where's the national upset about this? Where's all the clamour and the news media talking about it? We have one report in The Independent, as the BBC picked up on it. Are there panels of people all discussing about how 120,000 British people are dead directly through austerity? What are Labour MPs saying about it? Why are they still sitting in Parliament, a Parliament that has attacked British citizens economically to the extent that 120,000 people are now dead who otherwise would be still alive today? So Britain moves from democracy to authoritarian state in pernicious veil of secrecy. First published September 2015, this article is now 3 years old. In that time, Britain has dramatically moved forward with its intentions to become the Western world's foremost surveillance state. And whilst all attention is on Brexit, a recent disclosure in Australia revealed that Britain is to press ahead with forcing all technology companies to provide backdoor access to encryption systems to the state. Everything that was proposed by the government in this article has become law. By 2020, Britain will be classed as a techno Stasi-state because the general public turned a blind eye and effectively waved through the legitimisation of authoritarian decrees. One should not forget that openness and participation are antidotes to surveillance and control. When David Cameron won the 2015 election, one of the first things he said was, "For too long we have been a passively tolerant society, saying to our citizens, as long as you obey the law, we will leave you alone." This ominous statement immediately threw a dark shroud over Britain's civil liberties laws, its openness and public participation. Few of the mainstream establishment press thought this was worthy of mention. From Zero Hedge, it's not just one of those domestic extremists and crazy conspiracy theory cooks who took serious issue with UK Prime Minister David Cameron's overtly fascist language when it comes to freedom of expression in Great Britain. The Independent was more sanguine. This is the creepiest thing David Cameron has ever said. New powers being brought in by the Conservatives should be of great concern to everyone. Theresa May, the most authoritarian Home Secretary in Britain aside of world wars, is by far one of the most dangerous politicians walking in the corridors of power. These new powers are expected to be the introduction of banning orders for organisations who use hate speech in public places, but whose activities fall short of proscription, and include new extremist disruption orders to restrict people who seek to radicalise young people, powers to close premises where extremists seek to influence others, strengthening the powers of the Charity Commission to root out charities who misappropriate funds towards extremism and terrorism, further immigration restrictions on extremists, a strengthened role for Ofcom to take action against channels which broadcast extremist content. Simply take out the word extremist from those 5 points and you have the existence of something completely different. Of course you could be forgiven for thinking that the government would not abuse such laws, but they already allow for such abuses to take place on current terror laws. For instance, the BBC is using laws designed to catch terrorists and organised crime networks to track down people who dodged the £145 licence fee. The Metropolitan Police Service has also come under fire for using the same powers to access the phone logs of journalists on 2 newspapers to trace their protected sources. In addition, Big Brother Watch discovered 372 councils had been authorised by the government to use the terror laws 9,607 times, the equivalent of around 11 spying missions a day, to hunt down non-payment of council tax. 7 public authorities, including the BBC, refused under the Freedom of Information Act to disclose why or how often they had used the powers. The BBC now refuses 48% of such requests. What is most striking about these events are that publicly funded bodies such as the BBC and police and local authorities are refusing to answer perfectly reasonable Freedom of Information Act requests. They are exercising powers they shouldn't have, but were given by a government that a law-abiding electorate were not consulted on and do not approve of in the first place. There is proof that local authorities have even used terror laws to surveillance dogfouling underage sunbed users and people breaking smoking bans. Now that the Conservative government in Britain has its feet under the desk, it is preparing to enact new legislation that, under the guise of the war on terror, that will vastly expand police powers and essentially criminalise speech and other political activity. Presented officially as an anti-terrorism bill, the proposed measures will be targeted at any popular opposition to government policies of aggressive militarism abroad and austerity measures in Britain, or for that matter anything the government deems worthy of oppressing. The new bill will include a series of measures targeting groups and individuals deemed by the government as extremist. This term is defined so vaguely as to encompass a wide array of political activity, such as local anti-fracking groups. The new bill will create extremist disruption orders for individuals and banning orders for groups. The targets of these new police powers will be those who have conducted harmful behaviour. The harmful behaviour covers activities that pose a risk of public disorder, a risk of harassment, even alarm or just distress, or creating a threat to the functioning of democracy. This will be used to criminalise campaigns critical of government policy and protests, which are frequently dispersed by the police on precisely the grounds that they disrupt public order. The language also indicates that the government would have the authority to target those merely planning such activity prior to it taking place, and they would do that through mass surveillance. UK Intelligence Agency, GCHQ, has already been caught acting unlawfully by spying on 2 international human rights organisations. In addition, last year it was revealed that GCHQ were illegally eavesdropping on sacrosanct lawyer-client conversations in order to both disrupt and make gains on negotiations. GCHQ failed to follow its own secret procedures. If spying on human rights NGOs isn't off limits for GCHQ, then what is, said Privacy International. From here we can see we now have a vast illegal state surveillance system that the East German Stasi would have had wet dreams about. The government is slowly closing down Britain's very open society, and they intend on doing so using one of Britain's finest philosophers and a well-tried and tested theory. The panopticon is a type of institutional building designed by the English philosopher and social theorist Jeremy Bentham in the late 18th century. The concept of the design is to allow a single watchman to observe opticon, all, pan, inmates of an institution without the inmates being able to tell whether or not they are being watched. Although it is physically impossible for the single watchman to observe all the cells at once, remember this was in the late 18th century, the fact that the inmates cannot know when they are being watched means that all inmates must act as though they are watched at all times, effectively controlling their behaviour constantly. Today, the internet has become the architecture of the state-managed panopticon. Speaking to The Guardian weeks after his appointment as the UN Special Rapporteur on Privacy, Joseph Kanache described British surveillance oversight as being a joke and said the situation is worse than anything George Orwell could have foreseen. Terror laws we have already are being abused. One is reminded of 82-year-old Mr. Wolfgang's pass being seized, and he then detained under the Terrorism Act for interrupting Tony Blair's speech at the Labour Party conference in 2005. Some of the most egregious cases of misuse include a council in Dorset putting 3 children and their parents under extreme surveillance to check they were in the catchment area for the school they had applied to. Like the prisoners of Jeremy Bentham's building, there is no privacy in the panopticon. A report by the House of Lords Constitution Committee, Surveillance, Citizens and the State, had warned in 2009 that increasing use of surveillance by the government and private companies was a serious threat to freedoms and constitutional rights, stating the expansion in use of surveillance represents one of the most significant changes in the life of the nation since the end of the Second World War. The governments of 2010 and 2015 have taken no notice at all. Tempora was one such government mass surveillance and spying programme, among many. It is alleged that GCHQ produces larger amounts of metadata than Americans' NSA. By May 2012, 300 GCHQ analysts and 250 NSA analysts had been assigned to sort data. The amount and type of data collected and stored is mind-boggling. Every email, phone call, location data, relationships, family and friends, affairs, work, income, expenditure, social habits, it simply has no end. You would not write down the passwords to your email account, bank or Amazon account, social media platforms and give a stranger the list. But that is exactly what GCHQ and other organisations have acquired. Optic nerve. Another UK state surveillance mission intercepted and stored the webcam images of millions of internet users not suspected of wrongdoing. They have stored naked pictures of you, your children, and pictures you have sent to family and friends in a whole new level of violation of our users' privacy. This was a biometric exercise of epic proportions. The programme collected 2 million citizen images in just a few months. We have no idea how far this programme went. On May 13, 2013, Edward Snowden made a dash via Hong Kong to Moscow. That June, the spying and surveillance revelations came forth, and what came forth was the stunning realisation that our government has been lying to us about the sheer scale of state surveillance conducted on a truly industrial scale. Not happy with all this illegal state activity over its citizens, new orders that the government are now seeking contain bans on individuals broadcasting their views on television, and anyone subject to an order will be compelled to submit any written publication, including social media posts, to the police before it is printed. In addition, the order will make it illegal for individuals to attend or address public gatherings or protests. Banning orders will allow the government to outlaw any organisations it feels is not in their interests. If such a move is taken, anyone found to be a member of such an organisation will be guilty of a criminal offence. Authorities will also be able to shut down premises used by groups. Human rights group Privacy International branded the new proposal as an assault on the rights of ordinary citizens. As The Guardian's Home Affairs editor wrote in an analysis of the proposal, the official definition of non-violent extremism is already wide-ranging, and as Big Brother Watch has pointed out, the National Extremism Database already includes the names of people who have done little more than organise meetings on environmental issues. Last year, the government even attempted to hold an entire terrorism trial in secret before abandoning it at the last minute. Together with a sweeping attack on democratic rights and legal norms, the Conservatives' anti-terror bills will further advance the government's right-wing agenda. Cameron's proposals, aided by Home Secretary Theresa May, make clear that the Conservatives are determined to vastly expand the repressive powers of the state. In little more than 5 years, the state has gone from an open society of democratic principle to one that resembles an authoritarian state. We are living in an electronic concentration camp. Everything you do in life is now recorded, and there is no place to escape. Soon it will be impossible to have a dinner party with friends without the state knowing about it and wanting to know the purpose of your gathering. Quite the opposite of Cameron's big society project that is destined to fail in the years ahead. The conduct of the British government and its intelligence services are acting under a pernicious veil of secrecy to the detriment of all citizens. So, as was explained at the beginning of this article, which, actually starts from here, okay, because this was published in 2015, and at that time Theresa May was Home Secretary, not Prime Minister. And as it explains here, in the 3 years since this article was written, Britain has dramatically moved forward with its intentions to become the Western world's foremost surveillance state. Okay. Everything that was proposed by the government in this article has become law. And by 2020, Britain will be classed as a techno Stasi-state. Because the general public turned a blind eye and effectively waved through the legitimisation of authoritarian decrees. And it was always predicted that the anti-terrorist laws were going to be applied to British citizens for all manner of reasons. As we can see, they've been used to track down people who have failed to pay their BBC TV licence. They have been used to track down people who have failed to pay their council tax. They have been used to spy on parents to make sure that they do live in the catchment area of the school they're sending their children to. They are being used against people who speak out again about state responses to child abuse, to fracking, the risks of fracking, all kinds of things. And previously, no matter what powers Britain gave itself, British citizens were protected. Our rights, our workers' rights, our human rights, our children's rights, which include all our rights to privacy and non-discrimination, all of those with Brexit have now gone, and we are totally under the rule of this actually evil government. They are an evil government, okay? This is evil. It's evil what has been done to the poorest and most vulnerable people in Britain. People surviving on state benefits, mostly sick and disabled people. They've been harassed, repeatedly harassed, by the implementation of ATOS, handing over our benefit system to private global corporations so they can earn a profit from inflicting dire suffering on people, stopping people's income, people who are sick and disabled, stopping their income for months, forcing them to live on £40 a week while they go through an appeal, which most of them win. forcing NHS staff to work in deplorable conditions, that they're having to turn sick people away. Imagine how that makes a doctor feel to know that they must go to work every day in order to not do their job properly. To witness people dying as a direct result of lack of resources. Suicides among doctors is skyrocketing. Among doctors and nurses. We've got nurses having to queue up at food banks. Now, how can MPs that represent the British people stay sitting in a parliament, especially the opposition, how can they sit in a parliament and not cause an absolute uproar about the fact that British nurses are having to queue up outside food banks? Are our MPs forced to queue up outside food banks? What kind of work would we expect them, what kind of quality of work would we expect from our MPs who are so poor that they have to queue up outside a food bank? And when you compare a nurse's job to that of an MP, well, let's face it, the MP's life is a breeze, isn't it? With their second homes and massive salaries and all the perks that go along with it. What are they doing? What are they doing to help British doctors and nurses? What are they doing to help the British workforce? What have they said about all of this that is happening? Where is the uproar about it? Where is the National Day of Mourning for 120,000 people killed by economic terrorism? Because suicide is one thing, isn't it? When people, for whatever reason in life, get so depressed they decide to take their own life. But suicide is quite another thing when it is directly related to a government's economic policy. People dying through lack of NHS resources have effectively been murdered by a government that has denied our NHS those resources and instead has poured trillions into bailing out actually criminal bankers who apparently are too big to prosecute, because apparently when it comes to bankers, Luciferian law applies, doesn't it? Might equals right to do as thy will. Might equals right to commit crimes against people and get away with it. That's Luciferian law. Did my grandfather lose his life, and how many men like it, through 2 world wars, in order for this country, for the elite of this country to be beneficiaries of Luciferian law? We need to ask ourselves that. We need to stop to brush away the fog, brush it away. Let's get some oxygen into the situation and get real and face facts. Because that is Luciferian law. And that is exactly what gives a government powers to insidiously and secretly implement such changes to our legal system that people can literally be arrested and held without charge for days, and even be secretly tried and have no jury. What? Because they were protesting against fracking? Because they're exposing child abuse? Because they're standing up for our human rights? Is it going to become a crime to demand our human rights? Well, yes, it is actually already a crime, according to the government's legislation and the manner in which it is being used. Why aren't GCHQ, if they've got so much resources, using their powers to track down the 1 million+ paedophiles presently operating in Britain, and many of them in gangs and groups? Are they using that technology to recruit from those child abusers, to put them in prominent positions? Yes men, who will implement everything that they want, because otherwise, look, we've got the goods on you, we're going to expose you. You know, I have explained it here in this. I'll leave you the link to it. I've covered it in a previous video. You know, this is what's going on. This is what is going on in Britain. How do these party whips manage to find the information about sexual abuse to demand loyalty from MPs? You know, this isn't coming from a conspiracy theorist. These questions are being asked by a Labour MP. She obviously has evidence. She'd informed Theresa May while she was Home Secretary. Theresa May ignored it. Now, that same MP is asking questions. Now she's Prime Minister. We're dealing with crime and criminals running our country. Crime and criminals that have dumped this referendum on us, thoroughly divided Britain, employed an insidious, actually criminal organisation like Cambridge Analytica to do exactly what the government is doing, spying on our Facebook, targeting certain individuals, stirring up hate and xenophobia. In fact, doing exactly the same things as apparently all of this legislation is supposed to stop. But no, we can see that actually the xenophobia, the hate speech, has been given a free rein, and it's people who are demanding their human rights, people who are standing up for children's rights, who are standing up to protect the environment, who are considered the enemy, not the people who are stirring up xenophobic hatred. And the child abuse, well, it is running rampant, isn't it? So, to end, I'm just going to get you one link up. And as I say, you know, you do need to think very, very, very carefully, Britain. So here we go. This is a Catholic friar caught with sexual image of a dog and child could return to Camden Church. I mean, he didn't just have a sexual image of a dog and a child, okay? He had over 5,000 images of child abuse, has been spared prison and could even return to working in the church, okay? He taught religious education at a Catholic school. He had even lobbied government as advisor to the Catholic Education Service. And some of the prohibited images of children were graded in the most extreme categories of child abuse. Members of his congregation who attended the sentencing to support Gardner broke down in tears as details of the sickening images were read out in court. One showed a 6-year-old child wearing a crop top with the words, "Paedophiles, can you blame them?" And another showed a 9-year-old engaged in a sex act with the dog. Now you can be assured that these are actually, well, 5,000 most extreme categories of child abuse. That's the kind of things that this man views for his pleasure. A Catholic friar. Okay. Now, the judge said the chances of Gardner committing further offences was very small indeed, and even said it was disproportionate to order that you do not have contact with people under 16 years. So basically, he's still free to work with children. He's still free to work with children. This is a London court. The court heard it was also possible Gardner could return to working in the church, but that was up to the Vatican. So he was given a suspended sentence. He did not go to prison. He is still allowed to work with children, and he's still allowed to work in the church. Okay? And, you know, as I say, meanwhile, for the rest of us, the non-criminals, the non-child abusers, the law-abiding citizens, sorry, we are under attack. And David Cameron did make it very clearly. They are not going to be a passive, tolerant government. As long as you obey the law, we will leave you alone. Do not. That was a serious threat. and too few people picked up on it. And instead everybody's been arguing about Brexit. A Brexit that was forced on us, a referendum that was forced on us precisely because the EU government, the EU Parliament had told Britain time and time again to get lost with their requests to abandon human rights and workers' rights and environmental protection laws. This Tory government, David Cameron, even stood against EU legislation to ban pesticides that harm bees. Fortunately, the EU Parliament won. They won through. The pesticide was banned. But David Cameron stood against that. He can't. The man can't even protect bees. You know, if it comes between a corporation's profits and bees, the rights of bees to live, then he will stand by the corporation. And this is what we need to understand. When it comes to British citizens' human rights, this government will rather stand by a corporation than stand by our human rights. And it is a very, very serious threat. And I hope that people will share this video. Even if you don't share this video, share the link. Make a video yourself. Talk about it. Get people woken up. Okay? And have a look at my most recent videos on child abuse and Brexit. In particular, the Brexit ones. It's very, very, very serious. We are living in very serious times, and what the people of Britain choose to do today will have major consequences for the next generation. So either we're going to ignore or we're going to get active. That's our choice. That's what we need to do, and it's the people, the adults of today, who need to do that. Because after us, there's nothing. The children are totally, well, that's it. How many centuries will they be under rule of this tyranny if we do not stand up and query it today? You know, and I'm not suggesting mass insurrection and riots and craziness. I am advocating peaceful protests that we don't stand against, but we stand up for. We stand up for our rights, we stand up for our human rights, we stand up for child protection directives. We stand up for. Because, you know, if Britain is going to be an independent nation, then that does not mean, that should not mean that therefore the only body that's going to be independent in our nation is the government. And they're going to actually abuse all their powers to persecute the compassionate and caring among us. So thank you for taking time to listen, and please, please spare a moment to think about the 120,000 people who are no longer with us today directly through the actually criminal actions of this Tory government. Okay, and it is precisely because of this that I was moved to make a video with basically singing "Lock Them Up," because they do need to face criminal charges for what they have done to Britain. They have totally ruined Britain and divided our society and injected a xenophobic core of, well, they've given voice to xenophobia, haven't they? That is what they've done, and it's outrageous, and it does need to be curbed. We are all at risk. We are all at risk. And it just fills me with sadness as that really how little has been done and how little response there have been from the collective British society. I mean, I do understand that people are very stressed at the moment and overworked, and a lot of people are feeling angry about things that are actually xenophobia and dogma, that our upset and stress is being diverted onto scapegoats, scapegoat issues, scapegoat groups. We need to understand where the rot and the crime is truly coming from. We need to address this situation that we're living in a country where suddenly, apparently, if you're rich and powerful, you can do what you like because you're too big to prosecute. We need to address that. And I'm sorry, Labour MPs, all MPs on the opposition seat, and even Tory MPs who have a heart and soul, you need to stand up. You need to, well really, you need to walk out of Parliament because it is totally corrupt. And what they are a criminal government. They are a criminal government. Please ask some questions. In particular, ask questions about the van that got stolen containing 200,000 blank voting ballot papers just before the 2015 election. We want to know about that because, you know, 200,000 blank ballot papers, a few thousand here and a few thousand there, could very easily have swung the election. And let's face it, because it's only a few thousand in this constituency, a few thousand in that constituency that is needed. And in fact, it probably bears testament to just how many people voted against the Tories, that actually Theresa May again only got in by a whisper. That even with the 200,000 stolen ballot papers included into the mix of the electoral vote count, that even then she only managed to get in by the skin of her teeth and had to form a coalition government. So, you know, we're dealing with total corruption. Do not think for a moment that a government that is prepared to murder 120,000 British citizens directly through their economic policy, do not put it past them to rig an election. Because, you know, at the end of the day, these are the powers that they are giving themselves already. So imagine what kind of powers they will be giving themselves once we're fully out of the EU and they're going to scrap our human rights. This is so, so serious. I cannot emphasise how important it is that British people now please get active, get aware. We do need another referendum because people now have more information other than the xenophobic extremism as promoted by the likes of Cambridge Analytica under direct employment of Tory party members, leaders, Tory party leaders, okay? The same Tory party that has delivered this and would dare, that the Prime Minister would dare to make a statement like this, a direct threat against law-abiding citizens. Well, it seems that we are a passive tolerant society, and to such a degree we'll do absolutely nothing while every single scrap of our rights are removed. I'm sorry, Britain, it's time to wake up.